A young child from Minnesota was playing outside in the freshly fallen snow, and when his parents went to check on him, he had vanished without a trace. But years later, his father looks under the neighbor's doghouse, and what he sees chills his blood to the core. The small town of Maple Hollow, nestled in the northern regions of Minnesota, was renowned for its tight-knit community and brutal winters. With a population of barely 2,000 souls, it was a place where everyone knew each other's affairs, shared their sorrows, and celebrated their joys together. The town had always prided itself on its safety and low crime rates. Children played freely outdoors, neighbors left their doors unlocked, and the community functioned as an extended family. That was until years ago when Joshua Coulter disappeared without a trace on a cold Saturday morning as snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. Ethan Coulter sat at his dining table, poring over police documents. The papers had become a familiar presence in their home. Reports, witness statements, and potential leads that ultimately led nowhere. His eyes occasionally drifted to the window overlooking the front yard, where his thoughts inevitably returned to that fateful day. His wife, Claire, moved through the house, the sound of her cleaning providing a rhythmic backdrop to his musings. The simple act of household chores seemed to give her a sense of normalcy, something to occupy her hands and mind. Despite the years that had passed, their home still felt suspended in time, waiting for their son to return. Still looking through those? Claire asked as she passed with a basket of laundry. Ethan nodded, flipping through another stack of papers. Detective Palmer said they received a couple of new leads last month. Nothing substantial, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. Both lived on these scraps of hope, however small they were. Joshua was a bright, red-haired boy with a laugh that filled their home. That winter morning, he had begged to play outside in the freshly fallen snow. Ethan and Claire had let him, as they had countless times before. Their property bordered a small wooded area that was familiar territory for local children. Ethan had promised to check on him soon, but when he went out, Joshua was gone. The search that followed was something Maple Hollow had never seen. The entire town rallied. Search parties combed the woods. Divers checked the frozen lake half a kilometer away. The police interviewed every resident. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually the active search was suspended, but Ethan and Claire never stopped looking. The sound of the doorbell pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He rose from the table, smoothing his sweater as he headed to the front door. When he opened it, he found Harold Stevens, his neighbor from across the street, standing on the porch. Harold was a tall man in his 40s, with prematurely gray hair and a perpetually serious expression. He had lived in Maple Hollow for many years, but in the time since losing his wife and son in a home invasion, he had grown increasingly reclusive. "Good morning, Ethan," Harold said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Sorry to bother you, but last night's storm wrecked part of your fence again. It fell onto my property." Ethan immediately began to apologize. "I'm so sorry, Harold. That old fence has been giving us trouble for years. I'll come clear it off your property, but I'll need to borrow a welder. Mine's broken, and I haven't had time to buy a new one." Harold waved off the concern. "Don't worry about it. I already fixed it. Just came to let you know." Ethan was surprised and felt a pang of unease. "You didn't have to do that." "Thank you. No problem," Harold replied with a slight shrug. "I had the tools and was working on something in the back of the house anyway." "Yeah, I heard some noise this morning. Figured you must be building something back there." Harold didn't elaborate on what he'd been building, simply saying, "Sorry if the fence doesn't look brand new. It's an old fence anyway." Ethan assured him, "Thanks again." Harold nodded and turned to leave. As Ethan closed the door, he found Claire entering from the backyard, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Was that Harold I heard?" she asked, unwinding a scarf from around her neck. Ethan nodded. "Our fence again." He fixed it himself. Claire hung her scarf on a hook by the door and smiled faintly. "It's been a while since we've gotten together with Harold. We should invite him to dinner, as a thank you for fixing the fence." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know, Claire. We still need to go through some of these police reports about the new leads for Joshua. I'd rather focus on that during dinner, not when we have company." Claire's expression softened with a mix of sadness and gentle reproach. "Ethan, we've become so isolated and lonely these past years. When was the last time we invited anyone over? Years ago. Ethan didn't respond immediately, knowing she was right. They had gradually withdrawn from social connections, their search for Joshua consuming every aspect of their lives. Harold, too, Claire continued. Look how reclusive he's become since his wife and son died in that robbery years ago. Can you imagine living completely alone for years? He must be a lonely man. She paused, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. It might be good to sit down and have dinner together. We've all been through similar experiences of loss. Maybe we could form a new bond. Ethan considered her words, his gaze drifting to the stack of documents on the table. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps they both needed this small step toward normalcy. All right, he said finally. I'll go invite him to dinner tonight. Claire's smile was worth the concession. It had been too long since he'd seen genuine happiness on her face. Ethan zipped up his jacket and stepped out into the cold winter air. Snow crunched under his boots as he crossed the street to Harold's house. It was a modest two-story home, similar to most in their neighborhood, though somewhat less maintained. The paint was peeling in places, and snow had piled up unattended in recent years. When he reached Harold's front door, Ethan knocked firmly and waited. After a minute with no response, he knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. He was about to turn and leave when he heard sounds coming from behind the house, a dull thud like someone hammering. Ethan rounded the corner of the house, his boots sinking into the deeper snow of the backyard. "Harold," he called. "I'm Ethan from across the street." The sounds led him to a small wooden structure at the far end of the yard, an old doghouse that had been there for as long as Ethan could remember. Harold was crouched inside it, apparently tinkering with something. Upon hearing Ethan's voice, Harold froze momentarily, before carefully emerging from the small structure. "F," he said, sounding slightly out of breath. "Sorry, I didn't hear you knock." "No problem," Ethan replied, noting how quickly Harold had straightened and positioned himself in front of the doghouse. "I'm surprised you still keep that old doghouse around. It's been years since you had a dog. Don't you want help dismantling it?" Harold's response came with a slight stammer. "It's a keepsake from Rex. He was a good dog. I like keeping it." Ethan nodded, understanding the sentiment. People clung to different memories of those they had lost. Harold gestured toward a larger structure, partially built nearby. "Actually, I've been thinking about getting a new dog. I've been working on that for a few weeks and wanted to finish it this morning." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? You're still working in this weather? That's impressive." Harold shrugged. "I used to breed dogs when I was younger, more of a hobby than a job." "Really? What kind of breed are you considering?" "I haven't thought much about it," Harold replied, seeming more relaxed now that the conversation had shifted. "Maybe a puppy or a medium-sized dog." "Well, Claire and I actually wanted to invite you to dinner tonight," Ethan said. "But if you don't mind, I could help you finish that new doghouse this morning, and we could go look for a dog together afterward. I know a local breeder in the area." Harold seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding. "I'd appreciate that. Should be able to finish this in a few hours, and dinner sounds good. Thanks." As they spoke, Ethan noticed that Harold occasionally glanced toward the old doghouse. There was something odd about his neighbor's behavior, but Ethan couldn't quite place what it was. Harold had always been a private person, especially after his tragedy. So perhaps it was just his discomfort with unexpected social interaction. "Great, then I'll let you get to it," Ethan said, stepping back. "Just come by when you're ready to go to the breeder, and we'll see you for dinner around 6. Harold nodded, already turning back toward the doghouse. "See you then." As Ethan walked back across the street, he couldn't shake an odd feeling. There was nothing overtly suspicious about their interaction. Harold had been perfectly cordial, if a bit awkward, but something felt off. Maybe it was just the unusual sight of his reclusive neighbor suddenly making plans for a new pet after years of solitude, or maybe it was just the oddity of someone doing all that woodworking in the snow. Reaching his own front door, Ethan set these thoughts aside. People process grief differently, and if Harold was finally taking steps to move forward with his life, that could only be a good thing. Ethan stepped inside, shaking snow from his boots in the entryway. Claire was in the living room, tidying scattered cushions and magazines that had accumulated over the week. He said yes to dinner. Ethan announced, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. Claire's face lit up. That's wonderful. What time should I expect him? Around 6, I think. You know what's interesting? He's building a new doghouse and plans to get a dog. I offered to take him to a breeder this afternoon. Claire paused her tidying and looked over with genuine surprise. A dog after all these years? She smiled thoughtfully. See, I told you he must feel lonely. Getting a pet is a good first step toward healing. Ethan returned to the dining table where he'd left the police documents. I suppose so. It's just unexpected. He's kept that old doghouse all these years like some kind of memorial. Claire resumed her cleaning, moving toward the kitchen. People find different ways to move on. Speaking of which, we need groceries for dinner tonight. We're running low on everything, and I want to make something special. Ethan sighed softly, eyeing the stack of papers before him. He'd been hoping to spend the morning reviewing the new leads, compiling his thoughts before the coming week consumed his time again. Can you grab what we need? I'd really like to go through these documents today, if you don't mind. Can you help with the grocery shopping instead? Claire asked. I want to clean the house properly for tonight. And you know, I don't drive well in this weather. It's too cold to walk or wait for the bus. Ethan looked at his wife's hopeful expression and felt a familiar pang of guilt. She asked for so little these days, and it had been her idea to reconnect with their neighbor, a small but meaningful step toward normalcy. All right, he said. I still have some time before Harold's ready to go to the breeder anyway. I'll do the shopping, bring everything back here, and then head out with him if he's ready. Claire's grateful smile was worth sacrificing his morning plans. She quickly wrote a shopping list, adding items as she checked the pantry and refrigerator. Ethan headed out again, shoveling a path from their front door to the driveway before starting the car. He let the engine run for a bit to warm up, his breath forming small clouds in the cold, crisp air. As he was about to pull out of the driveway, he noticed Harold crossing the street toward him. Ethan, Harold called, approaching the car window. Ethan rolled it down. Hey, you done with the doghouse already? Harold shook his head. Actually, I just remembered I already have plans to meet some friends this morning. I'll have to cancel our trip to the breeder, but I'll still come for dinner tonight. No problem, Ethan replied, surprised that the reclusive Harold had social plans. I'm just going to grab groceries. We'll see you at 6. Harold nodded and headed back toward his own house. Ethan watched him go, that odd feeling returning. In all the years they'd been neighbors, he'd never known Harold to mention friends or social gatherings, but then again, they hadn't exactly been close in recent years, both families retreating into their private grief. Ethan drove to the supermarket, his mind toggling between thoughts of Joshua and mental notes of what to buy. The grocery store was relatively empty for a Saturday, most people likely deterred by the weather forecast predicting more snow later that day. He methodically worked through Claire's list, adding a few items he knew she liked but had forgotten to note. As he loaded the groceries into the car, heavy gray clouds were gathering overhead, promising the forecasted snowfall would arrive sooner than expected. When Ethan pulled out of the supermarket parking lot, a familiar car passed on the main road. He glanced twice, recognizing Harold's blue sedan. The car's windows were clear enough for Ethan to easily see that Harold was alone, driving in the opposite direction of their neighborhood. Ethan's route home followed the same road for a while, and he found himself inadvertently trailing Harold at a distance. A few minutes later, Harold's car turned into the parking lot of Northwood's Kennels, the local dog breeder Ethan had mentioned earlier. Ethan drove by slowly, confusion settling in. Harold had canceled their trip together, claiming he had plans with friends, but here he was at the same breeder, alone. For a moment, Ethan considered pulling in too, but what would he say? He had no right to question Harold's small lie. Maybe the man simply preferred to pick out a dog on his own, without the pressure of someone else's opinions. Or maybe he was meeting his friends there. Still, as Ethan continued home, the inconsistency nagged at him. It seemed an odd thing to lie about, especially when Ethan had offered his help and expertise, but Harold had always been peculiar and reserved, more so since his tragedy. By the time Ethan reached home, a light snowfall had begun again. He unloaded the groceries quickly and found Claire in the kitchen, already prepping for dinner. "You're back sooner than I expected," Claire said, taking a bag from his hands. Ethan nodded. "There wasn't much traffic, and I actually saw Harold at the kennel on my way home." "The kennel? I thought he canceled with you." "He did," Ethan replied, setting the remaining bags on the counter. "He said he had plans with friends, but I just saw him pulling into Northwood's kennels alone." Claire paused in unpacking the groceries. "Well, that's odd, but it's not really our business, is it? Maybe he just wanted to look around on his own first." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, though something about it still felt strange to him. As they put away the groceries, Ethan glanced out the kitchen window and noticed Harold's car pulling into his driveway across the street. Harold got out and opened his trunk, revealing a metal dog crate with what appeared to be a German shepherd inside. From this distance, and with Harold's back to him, Ethan couldn't see the dog clearly, but he could make out the distinctive coloration. "He's back already," Ethan commented, "with a German shepherd, it seems." Claire joined him at the window. "That was quick. He must have really connected with the dog. Love at first sight happens, I suppose," Ethan said, echoing Claire's earlier sentiment. "But it's still strange. He used to be a breeder. I know these transactions usually take some time with paperwork and all." He was in and out incredibly fast. They watched as Harold struggled to maneuver the crate through his snowy yard, the dog making the task harder with its movements. "He's having trouble with that," Ethan observed. "I should go help him." Before Claire could respond, Ethan was already heading for the door. He crossed the street quickly, calling out to Harold as he approached. "Need a hand with that?" Harold's head snapped up, his expression momentarily startled. "I'm fine," he said quickly, his tone sharper than the situation warranted. "I'll see you tonight," he added, clearly dismissing Ethan. Taken aback by the abrupt response, Ethan hesitated. "All right, if you're sure." Harold only nodded, already turning his attention back to the crate and struggling to push it through the snowy yard. Ethan returned to his house, a growing unease settling in his stomach. Something about Harold's behavior seemed off, but what reason did he have to suspect his neighbor? The man had been nothing but quiet, if distant, all these years. When he stepped back inside, Claire gave him a questioning look. He didn't want help, Ethan explained with a shrug. Said he's fine on his own. Claire nodded, returning to her dinner preparations. Some people just don't like accepting help. It makes them feel vulnerable, I suppose. Ethan agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Harold's odd behavior than simple pride. The hours passed slowly as snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Maple Hollow with a fresh layer of white. Ethan had returned to his stack of police documents, finally able to focus on reviewing them. There weren't many new developments, just the same frustrating lack of concrete leads that had characterized a search for Joshua from the start. One report mentioned a possible sighting in a town 300 kilometers south, but the description was vague, and the follow-up investigation had yielded nothing. Another referenced a boy matching Joshua's description who had been enrolled in a school in Montana under a different name, but when authorities checked, it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Ethan rubbed his temples, fighting the headache that always seemed to accompany these review sessions. Years of false hopes and dead ends had taken their toll, but he couldn't give up. Somewhere, Joshua might still be waiting to be found. As evening approached, Claire's kitchen filled the house with warm, inviting aromas. She had prepared a roast with vegetables, fresh rolls, and an apple pie for dessert. It was more elaborate than their usual meals, a sign of how important this small social occasion was to her. "Do you think he'll really show up?" Ethan asked as he helped set the table. Claire placed napkins beside each plate. "Why wouldn't he?" "I don't know. He's been acting strangely today. All these last-minute changes of plans. The way he reacted when I offered to help with the dog." Ethan paused, unsure how to articulate his vague misgivings. Probably just nervous about socializing after being alone for so long. Claire reasoned, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Harold stood on their porch, holding a bottle of wine, his coat dusted with snow. "Hope Red's all right," he said, handing the bottle to Ethan. "Perfect. Thank you," Ethan replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Come in, get out of the cold." Claire greeted Harold warmly, taking his coat and thanking him for coming. The initial awkwardness of the gathering eased gradually as Claire poured drinks and they settled at the dining table. The conversation stayed light at first. Local news, the weather, harmless topics that required little emotional investment. As they began eating, Ethan decided to broach the subject of Harold's new pet. "So, I saw you got a German Shepherd today. How's it settling in?" Harold's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and Ethan noticed a subtle tension in his posture. "It's fine, still adjusting to the new environment." That was a quick trip to the breeder. Ethan said casually, "I saw you heading there on my way back from the supermarket, right after you mentioned meeting some friends." Harold's eyes flickered nervously. "Sorry about that. My schedule got unpredictable. My friend canceled at the last minute, and I was so excited about getting a dog that I just wanted a kennel." Ethan nodded, sipping his wine. "I was surprised they processed everything so quickly. When I was breeding, the paperwork alone usually took a while." Harold shifted in his chair. "Actually, I'd ordered a few days ago. I was just there to pick it up." The explanation sounded reasonable enough, but Ethan couldn't shake what he recalled from that morning. Harold had said he wasn't even sure if he wanted a puppy or a medium-sized breed, and something about Harold's demeanor now, the way he avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his glass, hinted at an unease that went beyond mere social awkwardness. Claire, sensing the growing tension, gently changed the subject. "Harold, Ethan mentioned you lost your wife and son years ago. I'm so sorry. We understand how hard it is to lose family." Harold's expression softened slightly. "Yes, it's been tough living alone all these years. We know something about that kind of pain," Claire said quietly. After Joshua disappeared, she couldn't finish her thought. Harold suddenly grew visibly agitated, his gaze fixed on the window, where snow was now falling heavily. "I'm so sorry," he interrupted, "but I think I should check on my dog. It's snowing harder now and the dog's new. It might be stress with the adjustment." He stood abruptly. "I'm afraid I left it outside in the crate and forgot to bring it inside before coming here." Ethan glanced out the window at the intensifying snowfall. "Yes, you're right. The wind's picking up too. Do you need help bringing him inside?" No, Harold said quickly, almost panicked at the officer's suggestion. "The dog is a German Shepherd, and it might get startled by strangers. Even I'm still getting used to him. I'll handle it and come back when I'm done." Claire stood, smoothing her apron. "Of course. Just make sure your dog is safe. We live right across the street, so don't worry about rushing back if it needs your attention." Harold thanked her gratefully and hurried to the door, leaving his coat hanging on the rack in his haste. After he left, Ethan and Claire returned to the table, the sudden departure leaving an awkward lull in the evening. "Det was strange. Ethan commented. Claire schwieg, refient der Weinglas. Es worried about his pet. It's understandable, I suppose." Ethan nodded reluctantly, and as they continued their meal, Claire sighed softly. "Ethan, imagine if he had left too, and you had to go to work and care for the house alone. Harold has been handling all that by himself for years. He must be a responsible man to care so much about his new dog. He deserves some appeal." Time passed, and Harold didn't return. The pickler had buckets sat shed on the counter, and the dinner room greauquier, save for the occasional clank of cutlery. "It's fini if he does come back," Claire said eventually. "The dog is new, so maybe he's having trouble settling it." She began clearing the table reposed when she noticed Harold's coat standing by the door. "Oh, he forgot his coat. It's freezing outside." Ethan stood. "He'll take it to him." Claire nodded, continuing to clear the dish. Ethan grabbed both Harold's coat and his own before stepping out into the snowy night. Snow crunched under Ethan's boots as he crossed the street, the cold air beating his exposed face. Snowflakes whirled around him, illuminated by streetlight like tiny stars falling to earth. Harold's house was dark except for a faint light visible from what Ethan assumed was a kitchen at the back. He approached the front door and knocked firmly, holding Harold's coat folded over his arm. After waiting nearly a minute with no response, he knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Ethan frowned, glancing at his watch. It had been over half an hour since Harold left the house. Surely it shouldn't take that long to bring that dog inside, even if it was being difficult. I stood there, contemplating what to do next. A distant barking sound came from the backyard. The dog was still outside in this weather? Concerned over reading hesitation, Ethan headed around the side of the house, calling out a one. Harold, it's Ethan. Are you okay? He broke your coat. The backyard was dimly lit by the light spilling from the kitchen window. Ethan could make out the German Shepherd, not inside the house Harold had indicated was his plan, but still outside. The dog passed restlessly, moving in and out of ETS small dogoes, a chain attached to ETS collar restricting ETS movement. Ethan scanned for Harold but saw no sign of him. The situation made no sense. Harold had left her dinner specifically to bring the dog inside, yet here it was, stationed outside in the worsening weather. Approaching cautiously, Ethan noticed that the large dogoes Harold had been building was still unfinished, despite his claim that morning that it had completed. Another inconsistency in an increasingly unsettling day. Harold, Ethan called again, loaded this time, with no response. He peered through the kitchen, window but saw no movement inside. Harold's car was still in the driveway, and in this weather, at this hour, it seemed clear they'd gone anywhere on foot, especially without his coat. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed Harold's number. The call went straight to voicemail after several rings. A growing sense of unease settled in his stomach. I pocketed his phone. The German Shepherd suddenly began barking more intensely. At first, Ethan thought the dog was acting to his presence, but I observed more closely. He realized that the animal was directing its attention toward the small dogoes, alternating between barking and whining. Keeping a safe distance, Ethan moved to get a better angle on the dogoes. From his new position, he could see something they hadn't noticed before. A wooden panel in the floor of the structure that looked like it could shift, with what appeared to be an unlocked padlock resting on it. There was also a metallic glint that might be some kind of handle embedded in the panel. Drawing on his experience with animals from his breeding days, Ethan approached the German Shepherd carefully, speaking in low, soothing tone. The dog, seemingly more distressed than aggressive, allowed Ethan to get close enough to unhook its chain from the collar and reattach it to a post several meters away from the dogoes. With the dog secured at a safe distance, Ethan knelt and peered inside the small structure. What had initially taken for a simple dogoose floor was actually a sophisticated trapdoor. The metal handle and latch were reminiscent of old war bunker they seen in historical documentary. A cold feeling, unrelated to the winter air, washed over him. Why would Harold have a hidden bunker beneath a dogoose? And why had he been so secretive and evasive all day? Ethan stood, his mind racing. He needed to talk to Claire. Fumbling for his phone, he yelled home. Claire, he said when she answered, his voice tight with urgency. He found something strange in Harold's backyard. There's some kind of bunker or cylinder the dogoes. A bunker? Claire's surprise was evident. What do you mean? There's a trapdoor in the dogoose floor with a handle and latch, like you'd see Old War bunker. The dog is still outside, chained, and he can't find Harold anywhere. He is not answering his phone, and his car is here. There was a pause before Claire responded. That sounds worrying. Do you think he might be down there? Maybe fell or got trapped somehow. He don't know, Ethan admitted. The padlock on the door is unlocked, which means someone could be down there, but why would they build a dogoose over a bunker entrance? It doesn't make sense. It could be dangerous, Claire warned. Maybe we should call the police, just to be safe. Your phone battery was low earlier. ELL make the call. Ethan nodded, took she couldn't see him. All right, but tell them it's just a welfare check. I'm worried Harold might be in trouble down there. He can't reach him, and his house is locked, but his car is here. Promise me you won't go down there? Claire insisted. Come back home, and we will for the police together. He promised. Ethan agreed. He'll be right back. He ended the call and took one last look at the trapdoor. The rational part of him knew he should follow Claire's advice and wait for the authority, but another part that had been searching for answers for years fell drawn to the mystery beneath the dogoose. Before he could decide, a noise came from the bunker, a metallic clank like someone climbing a ladder. Ethan froze, his gaze fixed on the trapdoor, which remained closed. The sounds grew louder, clearer, unmistakably footstep on metal ring. Then, with a scraping sound, the wooden panel shifted, and the padlock fell as it as the lid opened. Harold emerged from the opening, crawling awkwardly out of the narrow space. When he straightened and saw Ethan standing there, his face registered pure shock, quickly followed by something darker, fear. It was hard to tell in the dim light. Ethan, Harold said, his voice carefully controlled by with an undercurrent of tension. What are you doing here? Ethan held up the coat. You left this at our house. When you didn't take him back, he took to bring it over. He paused, then added, he was worried when you didn't answer the door, and then he heard the dog barking. It's out in the cold. Harold took the coat from Ethan's outstretched hand with slow, deliberate movement. Thanks. Yes, about the dog, it's still not really warming up to me. I'm not so sure about bringing it inside anymore. I hope you understand. Ethan couldn't hold back. He looked directly at the open trapdoor. What is down there, Harold? Harold's posture stiffened, his expression wary. Nothing that concerns you. Los paramédicos estuvieron de acuerdo y pronto se dirigeant à l'hôpital mémorial de Maple Hollow. Ethan y Claire viajando junto a su hijo mantuvieron una distancia respetuosa entendiendo que para Joshua todavía eran esencialmente extraños a pesar de la conexión biológica. En el hospital, los médicos realizaron un examen exhaustivo mientras Ethan y Claire esperaban ansiosamente a Detective Martinez. Unió a él su explosión grave. Harold no está diciendo mucho, pero para lo que hemos reconstruido. Y lo que Joshua no ha dicho parece que secuestró a su hijo el día que desapareció resultó tener ese viejo bunker de guerra en su propiedad y construyó la pera justo encima. Aunque no estamos seguros porque posiblemente como respuesta a su propia tragedia familiar y tan asantió su esposa e hijo fueron asesinados o una invasión a su hogar hace 10 años que fue el mismo después de eso. Probablemente desencadenó cualquier crisis mental que llevó a esto estivo de acuerdo la detective Claire. Se secó las lágrimas 8 años de mentir a nuestro pobre Nino ni siquiera sabe cómo es realmente el mundo. La recuperación psicológica será desafiante, reconoció la detective Martinez, pero los niños son notablemente resilientes con el apoyo y la terapia adecuada. Tienen todas las posibilidades de adaptarse a la vida normal. Nuevamente el doctor Patel, el pediatra que había examinado a Joshua, se acercó. A él con un portapapel a la mano físicamente está desnutrido y muestra signos de deficiencia de vitamina D. El ocual esperado dadas las circunstancias y desarrollo muscular está por debajo del promedio para su edad, pero no es signo de abuso físico. Parece haber sido alimentado regularmente y mantenido en condición relativamente sanitaria. Claire se cubrió la boca luchando contra un suave de alivio y puso su brazo alrededor de ella atrayéndola cerca. Podemos verlo, preguntó el del sector Patel asentó sí, pero por favor entiendan que todavía está procesando. Todo ha hecho alguna pregunta. Sobre usted el ocual y una señal positiva, pero no esperan reconocimiento o afecto inmediato. Esto llevará siempre. Encontraron a Joshua sentado en una cama de hospital luciendo pequeño y perdido entre la sabana blanca. Cuando entraron y levantó la mirada a su expresión cautelosa, pero ya no temosa. Hola, dijo Claire suavemente deteniéndose a una distancia respetuosa de la cama. Hola, respondió Joshua estudiando su rostro. Tu es realmente mi mamá. Claire asintió incapaz de hablar a través de su lágrima. ¿Y tu es mi verdadero papá? Preguntó Joshua volviéndose hacia Ethan. Si confirmó Ethan su voz rusada con emoción. Te hemos estado buscando desde que desapareciste. Nunca perdimos la esperanza. Joshua pareció considerar esto. Harold me dijo que mi mamá había muerto y que todo fuera un enemigo. Frunció el seno. ¿Por qué mentiría así? Ethan intercambió una mirada con Claire inseguro de cuánto explicar. Harold perdió a su propia familia hace mucho tiempo. Dijo cuidadosamente. Creo que estaba muy triste y confundido. Hizo algo muy malo al levarte y mentir. ¿Va a vivir con usted ahora? Preguntó Joshua, un indicio de ansiedad en su voz. Y si eso está bien para ti, lo aseguró Claire. Todavía tenemos tu habitación tal como estaba, pero nada tiene que si es demasiado rápido. Podemos tomarlo un día a la vez. Joshua asintió lentamente, no los recuerdo. Admitió su voz pequeña, pero cuando si tu foto se detuvo inseguro. Está bien, lo aseguró Ethan. Tenemos mucho tiempo para conocernos de nuevo. En los días que siguieron la historia del descubrimiento de Joshua y el engano de Harold se extendió por todo Maple Hollow. Los reporteros locales clamaban por entrevista con la familia que había sido milagrosamente reunida después de 8 años. Ethan y Claire rechazaron toda la solicitud de entrevista, concentrándose en su lugar en ayudar a Joshua a adaptarse a su nueva realidad. Llevaron álbum familiar al hospital mostrando fotos de su primera infancia y contando la historia sobre su vida del secuestro. Harold fue acusado de secuestro, encarcelamiento, falso agresión y múltiples violaciones de armas. Tras su arresto, los investigadores descubrieron diario el búnker detallando su deteriorado estado mental a lo largo de los años y su obsesión por crear una familia de segunda oportunidad. Después de perder la suya propia mirando a su hijo, ahora Ethan sintió una profunda Mezcla de dolor por los años perdido y gratitud por esta segunda oportunidad, el camino por delante no. Sería fácil, Joshua necesitaría terapia intensiva para su parano de aislamiento y aunque no, pero está bon junto de nuevo después de 8 años de búsqueda de esperar contra toda esperanza, su familia finalmente estaba completa.